Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, we are talking about a very contentious issue, vaccinations. Before we get started, please consider subscribing to this channel, whether you're listening to it on podcast listening apps or whether you're watching via our YouTube channel, and hit that little bell so that you get notified whenever we release an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by the Coffee Roasters Mastermind group. If you're a coffee roaster and you're looking to be amongst other people who share in learning and in growing as a coffee roaster, coached by the fabulous Ante Bikic, head to the show notes and click on the link today. All right, vaccinations. Why are we talking about vaccinations? I'm even shocked that I am recording this episode of the podcast and having this conversation about vaccinations, because it is something that I do not talk about with people publicly. I don't talk about my personal decisions around vaccinations. I don't ask people about whether they're getting vaccinated or not. That's a subject for my very inner circle. But the reason we want to talk about it today is because we are starting to see vaccine mandates happen around the place. We are starting to see cities mandate that you can't sit inside cafes unless you have a vaccination. If you don't have a vaccination, you have to sit outside. We're starting to see staff being told that they no longer have employment at certain coffee shops if they don't have a vaccination. We have a whole bunch of decisions being made that tell you what you should do, what you shouldn't do, what you have to do, what you don't have to do, etc., etc., etc. So, given that, I want to talk about what happens when we start to mandate how people have to live their lives. Now, anyone who listens to this podcast or listens to my other podcast, Love and Other Delusions, knows that I am dead in the center when it comes to political leanings. I consider myself a centrist, and that pretty much says that I'm in no tribe, I'm on no team. The closest thing that I would get to kind of categorizing myself is somebody who stands for civil liberties and civil freedoms, which sort of puts me in the libertarian camp, but also that's getting skewed. So essentially, to just describe myself so that you have a preface for this, for what I'm about to say, I'm somebody who listens to logic. I'm somebody who thinks critically. I'm someone who has a science degree in genetics. And so a lot of this stuff I've studied. And so I look for people who are rooted in not only science, but critical thinking and logic that are detached from being a part of any religious group, any governmental group, etc., etc. I think the people who sit in the middle are the people who will hold the majority of power as we move into the future. And that is because they're people who are prepared to think for themselves. And this leads me into the discussion of vaccinations. What I want to say to everybody today who listens to this is, can we please be kinder to each other around decisions for vaccinations? The grey around this subject is so much wider than the absolutes. There are reasons people want to get vaccinated and reasons people don't want to get vaccinated. There are reasons why people want to wear a mask and why people don't want to wear a mask. Some of those reasons have to do with their political leanings and their religious ideologies, and there are other people who are doing it for medical reasons. Some people are doing it because they just want to be super compliant. Other people are doing it because they want to be super non-compliant. There are a vast variety of reasons why people want to do one thing or the other. And usually the reasoning is much more complex than just, I want to comply or I don't want to comply, or I'm immunosuppressed or I'm not immunosuppressed. A lot of these things are very nuanced. You having a blanket statement of, You either get vaccinated or you can't work here, or you either get vaccinated or you can't come into our coffee shop. Now that's the neat way to bundle it. But you're trying to run a business, or you're trying to be a really great employee. And what ends up happening is once an external factor comes in that mandates that now the determinant factor of whether you will be an employee in this workplace is whether you're vaccinated or not. Or you as a business are going to run a business that's based on selecting customers not because of the coffee that they like, but because of the choices that they've made around vaccines. The nuance there says you are selecting your customer base purely on their vaccine decisions rather than on whether they're aligned with the coffee and all the products that you're serving. And so what I would invite you to do is to consider that forcing people to get vaccines or forcing people and shaming people for not getting vaccines really does ignore the vast nuance that exists in this topic. And if you are considering that this is just cut and dry, super simple, you either get vaccinated or you don't work here, is signaling to your staff and signaling to future staff that the culture of this workplace doesn't consider the employees' needs. It doesn't consider customer needs. All it does is suggest that what the owner wants is absolute, and it's rather an authoritarian approach. So what's the alternative to something like this? Because I don't want to go out there and say like, hey, listen, guys, it's all great and there's no solutions. Well, there is solutions. And in the next few episodes of this podcast, we're going to be talking a lot about who are the stakeholders in your business and why is that shifting right now? And this is a perfect example of why this is shifting right now. The solution to this situation is to talk to each other. Get your team together, have a discussion about how you all feel around this. Do you as a team, do you as a business unit, are you all going to feel safer if you only allow people into the cafe that are vaccinated? Are you open to having solutions for people who are choosing to walk in unvaccinated? What are those solutions, and how do all the scenarios that play out for your business, how do they all continue to be inclusive for your staff and for your customers? And for other stakeholders, your suppliers. Are you going to turn around and say, well, we don't accept supplies from people who aren't vaccinated? What happens then? The nuance around this subject is really very challenging for our industry because we are on the front lines at a time when there are so many compounding factors really making it difficult for businesses, small business particularly, to keep running. So just something to consider. Remember, communication is key whenever you're faced with such challenging situations as this. Compliance under the right authority, under the right leadership, can often be the fastest way out of a situation. But who determines whether you believe your leadership is the right leadership, whether it's doing the right thing? That's something that you agree based on the values and the culture of your business. So this time is really showing us and testing us in the confidence and trust that we have in our leadership teams. And it's also bringing to the forefront what are our own beliefs around the way we engage with authority. Everything is much more nuanced than I believe we all thought it was or the vast majority of us thought it was before this pandemic. This pandemic is really highlighting that. And so again, I've said it a couple of times in this episode, communication, communication, communication. Work on this as a team, have a discussion as a team, and then communicate your decisions through social media. Communicate the fact that you've had the discussion as a team. Communicate the interests that were shared in the group and why they were shared, and perhaps you don't need to, well, not perhaps, don't out your staff unless they're comfortable being represented as a part of the decision making, but let your customers know through open, clear communication. This is being assertive, that this is what we've chosen as a business, and perhaps through the rules that you need to follow, you could find really cute, clever, interesting, fun workarounds that perhaps like in New York, where unvaccinated people are not allowed to go inside and dine inside a cafe. What are some really fun, interesting things that you can do that don't put you in legal trouble, but also don't exclude people who have chosen to not be vaccinated? This is a separatist society that we're leaning into here if we start doing a segregationalist approach to things. And I'm not sure that that's what we as a coffee community represent. So how do we make this less separatist when what we're all about is bringing people together? I hope this has been helpful. And I hope that it's something that really does stimulate a lot of discussion in your workplaces, amongst your teams, amongst your colleagues, and perhaps across your supply chain and in your local community. We have opportunities to bring each other together. Let's take those rather than lean into so many of the opportunities that exist these days to separate us and divide us. Don't forget to subscribe. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.